Carbondale Historical Society. This man is with the Archibald Historical Society. He's going to say a few words for us right now.
It's all about Dr. Powell. Graduated from Penn State University with a BA. Then he got his MA from George Washington University. Then he got his PhD from the Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana. He's the president of the Carbondale Historical Society and Museum. He's authored 26 ebooks in history of the Delaware-Hudson Canal, Company and Gravity Railroad. Plus he's read hundreds and hundreds of articles. I've never had a chance to go up to Carbondale to hear him and see his displays up there. Take some time off and do it. Tremendous up there.
Thank you.
Dr. Paul.
Good to be here. Speaking of those DNH things, I don't mean to mix my metaphors here, but here's essentially a bibliography of my DNH stuff, and if you'd like to have a copy of that, you may have that. The DNH is largely the center of my life, but somehow or other I've gotten tangled up in all this UFO business. I don't, and it's one of these things which just sort of happened. I haven't spent years studying it, but all of a sudden people want to know about it, and so I've been gathering material together, and I've got a lot of stuff on it. I know a little bit about it, but I don't regard myself as being an expert on UFOs and on this UFO, but I have a lot of information, and I think it's pretty well organized and meaningful. The thing of it is there's so many versions of this stuff out there, and so many people have bizarre notions about what happened. But so let me share with you some of the basic facts. Some of you may know these facts better than I do, but let me just share some of these basic facts about what happened on that November 9, 1974. There were three Carbondale teenagers. At around 7 p.m., according to statements later made to the police, Bill Lloyd, 16, his brother John, and their friend Bob were walking along 12th Avenue, which borders the local football field that was vacant. Suddenly they heard a noise in the sky. They looked up and saw something coming over the mountain, which abuts the eastern end of the street. This is the Russell Park area. They were just walking along, and then suddenly things were going on above their head. It was a yellow-white thing with red sparks shooting out of it, said John Lloyd. It was like a falling star coming down. It was flying east to west, and Bob Gillette, and it was sure fast. It was sort of like a yellowish red star and came down in an arc. I didn't see any tail or sparks on it. The youth says they watched it sail over the football field where it fell out of line with their vision. Seconds later, they heard it hit water. There was a silt pond up there next to where there was a breaker. In the Russell Park area, there's a breaker and a silt pond associated with the breaker. It made a sizzling sound, said John Lloyd. A fizz, like when you throw a cigarette in the water. It was lower pitched, though. To the west of the football field was a pond that covered roughly an acre. Decades earlier, when Carbondale was a coal mining capital, the pond had been part of a coal mining washing operation. Now it and the surrounding land, owned by a local junk dealer, lay idle. The boys ran to the pond. They told the police they saw a light coming from the bottom of the pond, about 20 feet from shore. It was orange with a sort of red glow in the middle, said Bob Gillette. It was about 5 feet in diameter. It got brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again, and kept doing that back and forth. It was glowing like a flashlight, said John Lloyd. The air smelled funny, like gas from a stove. The boys told police they ran back to the Lloyd brothers' apartment 3 blocks away to tell an older brother what they had seen. Other neighbors went back, saw the light, and then they phoned the police. So this happened. The sighting happened at around 7 p.m. Let me check the time on that exactly. The sighting. Oh, actually, it was 3:30 p.m. on Saturday. They observed these objects coming out of the sky, and they went and phoned the police immediately. Took the police several hours to get up there. The police department was just, down the hill, but it took the police a couple hours to get themselves up the hill and get to the site. And the police, as far as I can determine, played a very important role in a lot of the drama that happened over the next couple days. The police arrived at the site where these boys had seen this stuff come out of the sky, and leave it to the police. They fired 4 rounds of ammunition into the pond, shooting these, whatever this was, in the pond. I mean, that's sort of like a quintessential Carbondale thing. Well, let me just shoot it and see what happens. Like, oh dear. And that was the beginning of it all. The police at that point, it's interesting, who were the police involved? The police chief at the time was Paul Kelly, who was a very nice man. I knew him, and we have in the historical society his police badge, and he was a great guy, Paul Kelly. Detective Sergeant was Francis Dottle. Francis Dottle was a little spitfire. He nothing but gave him more pleasure than fighting and being just controversial tough guy. Patrolman Mark Trella and the police arrived 2 hours later. There's another listing of the police who came up that I found, which said that Francis Dottle, yes, he was the director of operations. Trella was also there. Jim Mua, M-U-R-I-A, he came up as well. Officer Leonard and Officer A-L-O-E-L-O, Officer Joe Jacobino and John Barbero. If you're from Carbondale, all those names are recognizable. Some of those people are still very much around in Carbondale. And so Dottle and his crew got up there and went to the park, and then the discussion began about what have we just seen, what happened here. And these boys described this object which they saw go crashing into the pond in a large arc coming from west to east, kaboom, into the pond. And many people saw this. I would think in the last 20 years, I have been told by no less than 10 or 15 people that they also saw this unbelievable object in the sky that night. People in Waymart on the other side of the Lusick Mountain saw this very bright light arcing through the sky, and then it looked like it was going in the direction of Carbondale. So it was seen by many people. People have told me they were driving, and the thing which gets me going on this is the fact that people whose credibility is high and they're respectable, honest, forthright Americans have told me, I was driving up the Scranton-Carbondale Highway and I saw this amazing light over Carbondale coming from the Waymart area, and then it seemed to disappear. People who are not hysterical, sort of crazy folks, but are very, very reliable, solid citizens, say they saw this light coming out of the sky. Somebody told me a couple of years ago when I was doing one of these presentations that they were coming out of a restaurant somewhere like in Oliphant or Peckville, I'm not sure where they were, but they were coming out of a restaurant. Just as they came out of the restaurant, they saw this light in the Carbondale direction come out of the sky. And it wasn't just like sort of a falling star, it was a major league light in the sky, and it seemed to terminate in Carbondale Township, Russell Park. And I've had 2 or 3 people at least whose credibility I would say is very high tell me they saw something come out of the sky. Now it all has, the possibilities are several. One, it could have been a shooting star, just an ordinary shooting star, but I think it was brighter than a shooting star. And most shooting stars self-consume as they come through the atmosphere, and they don't reach the ground. So some do, but not many do. And most shooting stars are not this sort of major league light coursing through the sky. They're lighter, more sort of poetic kind of lighting. And so it possibly, this object was possibly a shooting star. Another possibility was could have been I think a space garbage. At that point in the history of America and the world, all kinds of satellites were going up, and a lot of them were failing, and a lot of them were coming down, and a lot of them were sort of falling apart in their orbiting around the Earth. And so it's a possibility, I think, that, and I think that's a real possibility, that the what was coming through the atmosphere that night and getting hot as it passed through the atmosphere on its way to the Earth. I think that you can get an argument together for saying that it might have been a space garbage of some kind, a weather satellite, or who knows, some kind of exploratory satellite. The Soviet Union was sending up lots of things into outer space at the time, and they're coursing around the world and all kinds of stuff flying around the world, weather satellites, reconnaissance satellites of some, all kinds of stuff. And I think it's possible that what went crashing into that silt pond in Carbondale Township might have been space garbage. It might have been some kind of piece of a satellite or something, and that object came to the ground. It didn't disintegrate on its way down. It came to the ground and splashed into the silt pond in Russell Park. The chief of police had a very, he was a likable guy. I knew him well, and he was like, I mean, there's a term for some people like him. I'm not sure, a little spitfire, cocky little son of a bitch guy. He had this kind of chip on his shoulder, you know. He was a likable guy, but he was always he'd just as soon have a fight with you as say hello. But he was likable. He wasn't nasty, but he was just one of those, we all know the type, sort of, you know, he was that way. He, with this object in his territory, in this silt pond, I think he then recognized there's potential that he can become a big deal when they can figure out what this is all about. I think he saw that as an opportunity, sort of, for like career advancement. He was at this on that Saturday night. When he arrived, he radioed county civil defense for a Geiger counter. He sent for a photographer. He took the temperature readings of the air and water. I reasoned, he recalls, that an object from space might be hot enough to raise the water temperature to abnormal levels. The air temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, the water 44 degrees, not abnormally warm. Donald now phoned Dr. Alan Hynek, astronomer at Northwestern University in Chicago. He seemed to have all these numbers and names at his disposal. He saw somebody at Northwestern University, and the head of the Mutual UFO Network, which has served as a sort of unofficial clearinghouse for USO information since the U.S. Air Force suspended Project Blue Book, its UFO study unit in 1969. So Donald phoned reports to the National Aeronautic and Space Administration in Houston, the Air Force NORAD Space Defense in Colorado Springs, and the local unit of the Civil Air Patrol. He then went looking for a rowboat and a net. He was going to solve the problem. But you get a picture. I'm not making fun of him or belittling him, but he saw this as a terrific opportunity to show the world just how clever and smart and effective he was in solving whatever crisis may come along. You caused the problem, we'll solve it, kind of stuff. So he had a very sort of take charge attitude. But I mean, he seemed to have all the telephone numbers and everything that he needed at his sort of ready hand to contact these people, and he did that on that Saturday night, and his success was amazing, because I mean, word spread in Carbondale that something is going on at Russell Park, and the police chief was also spreading the word far and near that there's heavy-duty stuff going on at Russell Park. So, given the fact that the nighttime was upon them, they didn't do much anymore than sort of wrap it up and then wait for the next day. I have a note here. The sheriff reported that on Saturday, 2 boys in Wayne County reported seeing a weird lighted object flashing through the sky. I mean, all these kinds of secondary reports, they seem to support this, what was going on this side of the mountain. On Saturday morning at dawn, On Sunday morning at dawn, the following morning, there were 1,000 people in Russell Park looking around to see what was going on up there. That was at dawn, there were 1,000 people. At 7 a.m., there were 2,000 people at Russell Park. At noon, there were 10,000 people in Russell Park. The police had surrounded the pond. They were being very protective of this site, and they were making a big deal out of this was an opportunity to show the world how up to date and effective they were in doing what they do. And so 10,000 people, and they were all being kept away from the pond by police. They couldn't get anywhere near the pond. They were being kept at the perimeter so that nobody could interfere with sort of the evidence in front of them. And then the things started going very sort of Hollywood after the police had fired the shots into the pond. I mean, it's like, I don't know what they thought they were doing by whether there was going to be strange green creatures coming out of this, whatever the object. But anyhow, it was under control. And there was even a map I have here. There's this unbelievable amount of paperwork that has been associated with this event over the years. Government reports of all kinds we have at City Hall, and there are these thick government reports on UFOs everywhere and all kinds of stuff. So then the question is what went into the pond? So then Chief Doddle, then they managed to get a rowboat from somewhere, and they went out on the pond to sort of look around and see what they could determine it was in the pond from visual reading of the pond surface. They weren't able to determine much by such. Then they decided they were going to get a net. They had a large net somebody produced, and we're going to sort of like do a drag through on the pond, and they snagged an object which was still hot, said they. And as they tried to get it out of the water, they couldn't. It was too big. They couldn't get it out of the water. It slipped back in the water, and they sort of said, "Well, we need something more significant than what we're doing." But the object that they snagged as they did a sort of a drag net across the pond was described by some of these police and in some of the reports as being 4 feet square and about a foot thick. Roughly, that was the dimensions of it. Some large object, which apparently was still warm. Now, if it had heated up to sort of, who knows how many degrees as it came through space, it would have stayed warm for a long time. I don't know how long it would have stayed warm underwater. It would have cooled off rather quickly, I would think. But anyhow, the police determined that it was still warm. They couldn't retrieve this object from the pond, and they decided they needed to get more people involved in helping to solve the problem. So in the meantime, all these thousands of people who were at the pond were being carefully kept a good distance from the pond. Don't get near, and you can't get near the pond because you may interfere with the evidence that we're about to retrieve from the pond. They managed to get, as I say, out there and snag this object. Then they saw another clue, which turned out to be a lantern. They saw a light in the water, and they were really, the level of excitement kept going up and up. But they were focused more on this large object. How are we going to get it out of there? So somebody there, one of the other cops probably, happened to know somebody who had a big sort of backhoe operation which could be useful for scooping the darn thing out of the pond. So, and this is also an interesting thing, which in my mind is a useful plank in this whole project of substantiating there was something heavy that came out of space. They got this. Somebody contacted a friend who then had this big backhoe. They put it on a flatbed truck, and the next thing you know, there's this flatbed truck arriving at the Russell Park area with this large, heavy-duty. They were going to scoop this object out of the pond. that arrived in the area of the silt pond, and the police went after it to get it out of the pond, and they at this point the people were pushed back so far that they couldn't really sort of see what was going on. They could see this flatbed truck and this backhoe functioning with the pond, and but this is when Chief Donald then had this notion of, he was very Hollywood about it. No, this is very important. You stay back. We can't. I don't want anybody messing with anything. And so the flatbed truck with this backhoe got in there, and many people have told me they saw this big flatbed truck coming up Park Street off to the pond with this backhoe on the back of the truck. Also then on Sunday, many people saw the same flatbed truck leave the Russell Park area with a large object wrapped in black plastic and disappear. The backhoe was still at Russell Park, but this large object, probably and certainly the object that they had scooped out of the pond, put on a flatbed truck, wrapped it in plastic, and away it went. Also in the course of the day, there was a mysterious sort of, I would call it it has a name, it's sort of like the standard sort of bread truck, a sort of boxy van kind of thing, appeared at Russell Park, went right through with the police permission, came right into the silt pond, and that's the last anybody saw of that truck. The truck disappeared. What must have happened is, whatever that truck was all about, I don't know what the truck was all about, I've never read anything on the truck, but the truck could pass through the Russell Park area, keep going south, and then eventually exit from that in Greenfield, in Carbondale Township, could get out of there. What that truck was all about, nobody seems to have ever commented on that, except at the fact that they saw it come in and they didn't see it go out, and it was not there after this whole thing calmed down, so it must have made an exit in the back. So one doesn't know what that was all about. And in the meantime, the level of excitement kept mounting and mounting, and people wanted to know more about what was going on. At this point, Donald, even the more people wanted to know what was going on, the more he became a big deal in charge of this local crisis. Don't worry, I'll handle it kind of attitude, you know. And I'm not making light of it, but that was his personality. And so this went on and on Sunday, most of the day, where there was this high drama. People were kept at a significant distance from the pond. Nobody's going to mess around with any of the evidence. But as I say, on noon on the following day, there were 10,000 people in the park, and then experts started arriving. The experts from various UFO organizations and from various people. The executive director of the UFO Research Information Center in Philadelphia arrived. Somebody from Robert Barry, director of 20th Century UFO Bureau, Collingswood, New Jersey. Scuba divers, they were all people, everybody was having a fine time solving the problem. Anyhow, it went on, and what I think happened, and I've read so much about this and have thought about it so on, is I personally think that what that object that went crashing into that pond was probably space garbage. It was some kind of part of a satellite, or something that was a man-made object that came coursing out of space. And when Donald and all the locals then got involved in figuring out what this is all about, and they had all these UFO experts and stuff, the object, I think, was then wrapped in this black, they got it out of the pond, the object was wrapped in this black plastic, put on this flatbed truck, and then taken away to some site, some military site where it could be examined and more could be learned about the object. And over the years, we have received in Carbondale various reports from various agencies and stuff all about this UFO. There are even, let me show you the map. They even produced. I mean, you can look at this later on if you like. But here's a map of the silt pond which they established, and there's the site of the impact of this large object, and over here is a site of a lantern. So I think Doddle was very excited by having sort of like big news in his backyard. This is a major object, and he did everything in his power to sort of promote it with the appropriate people in government agencies and stuff. And then I think then the question that was raised immediately with this event is what did we just see? What was going on? I think it was space garbage, and what they were trying to do is they had to determine what it was all about. This is this mysterious. We need to learn more about this. So they needed a cover-up story. They needed to have something to quiet down the people. They had to make them sort of say, "It's all right. Go back to bed. Fall asleep. It'll be all right." No, anyhow, so they created, and this was, I think, partly Doddle's idea. This cover-up story, which was associated with an object, a red lantern, said Doddle. Here's a picture of that lantern. And so what they did, and here's the lantern. This lantern did not make a major trip through space with glowing red hot. The plastic would have melted in 2 seconds and so on. This did not happen. So what Doddle did, and documented reports say that Doddle then threw a lantern into the silt pond, and he immediately then he essentially turned around and said to the folks, "We got it covered. It was a lantern. Now go home and go to bed." This is what came out of the space. But I think this is what I think what this was all about this was to divert attention from what object fell into the water that night. This was supposed to be like the cover-up part of it. And this lantern, there's an interesting tale to tell with that lantern. This lantern, as I say, wouldn't have, it would have melted in 2 seconds. Much of it is plastic. But I was in the Historical Society on the 3rd floor of City Hall about 15 years ago, maybe whenever Charlotte Morrow was mayor of Carbondale. And some of you probably knew Charlotte Morrow. She was a wonderful woman, a great lady. She was one of those Carbondale characters which really add a lot of variety and quality to life. She had a very on the surface personality. At council meetings, she was not above using vulgarity on other members of the council. And what the hell are you trying to do? We're trying to. She had this kind of attitude about it. She was a likable, but she was the female version of the police chief. She was very take charge, and she had the most unbelievably browbeaten little husband who wouldn't even. She must have had him scared to death. But anyhow, she was a likable but very noisy person, and you always could tell on the 3rd floor where the Historical Society is. Even at a council meeting, you could hear Charlotte holding forth on the second floor down the hall at a council meeting. She was very noisy. I say that because one day she came up to the 3rd floor where I was, and she appeared at the door, and I looked up and she sort of looked aside, but she was in a way announcing her presence by her physical presence. She didn't say anything, but she came through the door, and I was seated at a desk there, and she appeared at the door. Let's assume this is the door of the Historical Society. She appeared at the door, and she took one step in, and I'm over there. She goes like this. She didn't say anything. She just went like this. And I took the lantern out of her hand, and then she quickly withdrew and went away. She never said a word. She never mentioned anything about it. And I never asked anything about it. But I think what the story was is there were stories in the newspaper, the local newspapers about saying, "Oh, it was a lantern. That was what ended up on." And so people were this appeared in photographs in the newspaper saying this was that space object that came into Russell Park and so on. But she didn't say anything about it. And I think what happened is because on that Sunday afternoon there was a huge press conference in City Hall where Donald was holding forth on what happened and how he solved the whole thing and blah 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 blah. And it was a lantern. It was not relax, go home. We got it covered. And so this lantern appears in newspaper stories and appears repeatedly as being the evidence to prove that Donald was right. And I think personally, it was part of the cover-up. And so then Donald had he had a lot to deal with because some of these UFO agencies there were people walking around Carbondale from these UFO agencies wanting to know more about it. They were talking to people. They wanted to know more details. They wanted to hear it from somebody else who was there. And so Donald, I think, who of course knew that he was inventing this story as a cover-up, was irritated because he was sort of seen as the bad guy for not playing he was feeling chained because he couldn't express what he believed to be true with this thing coming out of space. He had to promote a lie saying this was what came out of space. And this lantern is it's really quite silly, and most people didn't believe it, but then okay, fine, well, let's get back to our lives and carry on. But I think that it was an attempt on the part of the police to calm people down, and also an explanation. You don't need an unsolved crime. You need an answer, and here's the answer. And so it's gone on, and all kinds of people have come to the City Hall over the years wanting to know more about it. So I sort of show them all these papers I have and reports from government agencies about UFOs and all kinds of contacts with people. And here's a document called "The Carbondale UFO Crash: The Reality and the Hoax and the Legend" by Matthew Grabler, Ohio UFO Notebook. And there's all kinds of statistics and dates and all kinds of stuff about the UFO. And here are some pictures of some of the 10,000 people who gathered around the silt pond to see what was going on. Here's a picture of the boat. They launched a boat. We were out in there looking around to see what they could learn. But it's an interesting phenomenon. I think that it's really characteristic of America at the time when all this space exploration was going on by people who were didn't have all their satellite skills lined up to the point where these things stayed in space. Some of them didn't stay in space; they crashed out of it. And I think that's what happened. But this has taken on over the years this major stuff, newspaper articles, stories still being written on them. And this is an enlarged copy of it. Pennsylvania's mysterious UFO lantern article, big article on the lantern. And so it's I'm glad to do my part in providing what data I have on it, and I think I have more than anybody in the Carbondale area has on it, mostly because when people do this research and then they need to have somebody to give a copy of it to, and then the copy ends up at the Historical Society. So we have this large folder of stuff and all kind of an analysis of various kinds of lanterns. All kinds of people have come up with stuff about various lanterns and what would have happened and what did happen. And But then it is, I think, officially more or less declared to be a hoax. It was not anything that anybody should worry about, but it was a dramatic event associated with something coming out of the sky. But one of the things which I said, whatever, I think what came out of the sky was a large object. It wasn't a meteorite. It wasn't a falling star or shooting star. It was some large object, some metallic object that got hot as it traveled through space and crashed into this pond, part of, I think, a satellite. And then all this other stuff was sort of woven around it. The object went out of Carbondale on that flatbed truck, and I'll bet 50 people have told me over the years, I saw the flatbed truck, I saw the object wrapped in plastic, I saw it go down Park Street. What went out of Carbondale? An object from that silt pond. And what could it have been? I think it came out of space, a satellite falling apart or disintegrating, whatever. But but nobody has ever been able to find any kind of official, government report. I don't know if this appears in lists of UFOs in federal papers. I haven't pursued that object. I haven't pursued that chain of thought. But it appears as being the Carbondale UFO. Lots of people know about it. Lots of people know when it happened, and so it's an interesting sort of thing in local mythology, and it doesn't do any harm to, I guess, celebrate it and talk about it. But I think there's still more to be learned about it, and I don't know. Maybe one day we'll know more about it. Maybe with all this contact that these people were making about various agencies, Department of Defense agencies and stuff. Somewhere there's a file of, who knows, classified material on this UFO that is not necessarily out there in the public domain, but there you have it. And it's part of our local history, and we are pleased to sort of collect whatever papers we can on it and keep them together so that somebody down the road may find these papers useful to look at. And that's about all I can tell you. This stuff in front of me here, that's just for display purposes. So please don't take any of that. That's part of my file of papers on this project. So just look at it, but don't take any of it away. And we'll keep moving forward. And maybe one of these days we'll have a lot more information about our celebrated UFO. Anybody have any questions? Yes?
I have a question. When I came back to the area around late 1999, 2000, I heard a lot about Blueberry Hill and sightings up that way. Have you heard anything about that? Have you followed that at all?
On Blueberry Hill?
Blueberry Hill, as you're going up toward Port City?
Yes, on the left, yes.
Yeah, and you did mention you graduated from Fell High School. Okay.
I did, yes. And what is associated with Blueberry Hill? I haven't heard that.
Sightings of UFOs.
I don't think I knew that. What can you tell us about that?
There is a what do you call it? Not horticulture, but
a nursery, a garden.
A nursery up that way. Yeah, and the fellow who owns the nursery was mentioning about that. And this is many years ago that I went up there, so I was wondering if any of that had come to your attention as you were doing the research on what happened at Russell Park.
No, I don't know anything about the...
Wow, I'm surprised they're keeping, people keep their mouths shut.
I don't know anything about that. I know exactly where Blueberry Hill is, but I don't know anything about any possible UFO sightings up there. But
wow, interesting, yeah.
These things are...
I've heard about them over the years, of people who just didn't want to talk about it because, somebody would think they're crazy. But these people, they're normal people. You're just like you and me and everyone else. And every now and then over the years. And, you know, at 80-some years old, you know, you see a lot of people in a lot of different areas. And probably about 4 or 5 have really said, you know, they saw them and they just don't say anything about it. Even a airline pilot had told me that at one time.
Yes, the things that airline pilots see are really amazing. The reports of what airline pilots have seen in the skies is really, it's sort of scary at times. You never know what you're talking about there.
And I had a neighbor at one point, and she told me that her uncle had given a deathbed confession that back in the 40s that he was working in Area 51 and putting together flying saucers for the United States Navy, or Army, I'm sorry, Army. So,
It's, we have at City Hall, it's an interesting, it's a rock. I don't know what it is. I personally think maybe it's a meteorite, but the Archibald Law was the man who taught the D&H how to do deep underground anthracite shaft mining in the 1830s, and he was a major figure in the history of anthracite mining. And he essentially, the profitability of the D&H went like this because of Archibald's Law and his technological expertise. Anyhow, he had on his desk in his office in the 1830s, he had this rock about this big around, and it has a very sort of like a very easy in your hand, but it's a perfectly smooth, round, wonderful rock. And it was given to us about 10 years ago by his great somebody. This was on Archibald Law's desk in the 1830s in Carbondale. We have his original instruments of drawing and his technological stuff. We have mine lamps and things all the way back to him in 1830. And he was brought here from Scotland by the D&H. Anyhow, this rock that was in the Archibald Law collection is, if I were to put it in your hand, it would go, what did you just put in my hand? It's an ordinary rock. It looks like an ordinary rock, but it is not a rock. I have asked any number of people who seem to know anything about geology, what is your take on this rock? What is this? And they immediately, I think maybe it's a meteorite, but it feels like it's lead or iron or something. It is so much heavier than an ordinary rock when you put it in your hand. And it's been passed down through about 6 generations of the Law family, and nobody's ever been able to determine what it is. And Archibald Law himself never told anybody where it came from, but it was on his desk, and then his son's desk, and it's on and on and on and on. And now it's on the 3rd floor of City Hall. But they're sort of interesting. I think I'm not sure what meteorites are mostly made out of. Do they have a higher iron content? Are they lead? What's in them? If somebody told me this was lead, I would say it is. But it is so much heavier than what you expect when you put it in your hand. Yes, sir? Oh,
I'm just wondering, why do you suppose that they went to such great lengths to go and discredit everything about UFOs? I mean, the evidence is so obvious. I mean, it is undisputed. I mean, this happened in 1974, what you were referring to, right?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, and is that pond, where is that pond?
It's the area. I could walk you to the exact site where the pond was or is. I haven't been up there in quite a while, but I know just where the pond was. I'm willing to. I sort of see myself as a vehicle of sort of passing information. I'm not making a judgment about whether it was right or wrong, did it or not. I'm just trying to put options on the table because I don't regard myself by any means as being an expert on this subject. But I try to just sort of convey the information and see what happens. You know, let somebody who knows a lot more about it than I do pick up the ball and run with it. But anyhow, that kind of object, that mysterious rock, I haven't had the right person look at it to tell me what they think it is. But it is like a mega rock, and I don't know what it is. And I don't have any geology connections to have somebody tell me
I'll
about
have my
it.
husband get in touch with you, he's a geologist.
Oh my God, wonderful. I'm
He's
there.
retired, but he still knows his.
I'm there just about every day on the third floor of City Hall. I'd be very happy to have a look at it.
All right. He
We
just
have
got out of
also
the
there, we
hospital,
have-
so it won't be this week, but.
We have interesting fossils at City Hall too, and I was showing them to somebody from not too long ago, and I went back to my office, and then this person came running down the hall and said, "Robert, you don't know what you got here." I said, "Well, tell me, I don't know what you got here." And these fossils, and they're the size of my arm. A section of a limb of a tree is 390 million years old.
Whoa.
And he showed me the evidence, and in a book for this particular kind of fossil. And here's the example, and there's our fossil. It's a perfect match, kind of, you know. But it came out of the ground in the coal mining process, you know. And so it's interesting, but it's an area that I don't really know much about. But I'm willing to learn, and I think it's very interesting. I had some students from Germany there not too awfully long ago, and they were looking at these rocks, and one of them said to me, "Would you like this?" And they handed me this. What looked like it had a lot of quartz in it, and maybe cement. I'm not sure what it was, but it was sparkly kind of. And I said, "Well, would you like this for your collection?" "Yes." "What do I have in my hand?" "You have a part of the Berlin Wall."
Oh, wow.
Put it on display. Okay, that's fine. Somebody came in several weeks ago and handed me what they think to be, they're essentially like Stone Age tools. They look like scrapers. It's a flat rock that has been so carefully, you can see it has been chipped away to make it perfectly for like scraping hydrogen like that. I mean, I don't know enough about such things to make a decision, but they found them up on top of the mountain in coal mining operations. They came out of the ground with coal mining. So you never know what's going on with what comes out of the ground. And an interesting thing about this part of the country that I know about geology is that there was a woman who lived in Forest City. Her name was Bernadette Slick. She was a real estate agent. Some of you may recognize that name. She was a lovely, interesting woman. Her house was filled with all kinds of geological specimens. This room had rocks and things that glowed green. This one had pink ones. This one had this kind of stuff. She had an amazing stuff. And she called me up there and she said, "I'd like to give you this." I said, "Mrs. Slick, we'd love to have it. We're the wrong person. This belongs in some kind of a state museum. This is an amazing collection you have of this stuff." And she told me during that visit a fact which was so useful to me in research on coal mining later on. She said, and this is conglomerate rock. And the miners all knew that when they got down to the level of conglomerate rock, that was the end of the coal beds.
Oh, wow.
Once they got down to the coal bed, the conglomerate rock, that was the end of the coal. And the thing about conglomerate rock is it is hard beyond comprehension on the scale of hardness of rocks. Diamonds, I think, are 10, if that's the maximum. This conglomerate rock, the hardness is 8.
Oh, wow.
It is very hard, and it only exists in 2 or 3 places in the world. One of them is here, one of them is off the coast of Scotland, one of them is in northern Spain, and always conglomerate rock is associated with anthracite coal, apparently. I then began looking at conglomerate rock and learning about conglomerate rock. And the foundation upon which Carbondale City Hall rests is conglomerate rock. Which tells me that these local stonemasons and local people knew the qualities of that rock, and it's the back part of City Hall rests on conglomerate rock. And anyhow, it's an interesting area. I think if I were to go to college again, I would focus on learning a lot more about geology and rocks and our planet as an object, because it's very interesting, and I don't know much about it. But anyhow, I am glad to have had the opportunity, Archibald, to present what little I know about our UFO, and I hope that somebody who knows a lot more about it than I do will come forward and pick up the rock and run with it. You know? Thank you very much.
Dr. Powell, I did know an old timer, a fireman from Uniondale. He just died a few years ago. He was there, and he said, Dale, I wasn't supposed to say anything, but that's a long time ago. It was part of a satellite, and apparently it had Cyrillic alphabet on it. He said it was from Russia.
Oh,
That's what he
wow.
told me.
Oh, that's good. I mean, thank you for mentioning that, Dale. I appreciate that. It's good to know. I mean, knowing the little that I do about it, it seemed like part of a satellite is the only real
That's what he told
explanation.
me. He said I wasn't supposed to say anything, but that's so long ago, don't worry about it. And he told me that.
Well, that's sort of, that's the icing on the cake. Thank you. Thank you very much.